Hello and welcome to this webinar hosted by the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub in collaboration with the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. Thank you for joining us today. If you just bear with me, I'll just pull my slides and we can proceed with the webinar. Okay. So on today's agenda, we'll start with an introduction of the speakers, their respective organization, and the webinar itself, followed by an overview of the regulatory sandbox license framework, a Q&A session to address your concerns, and finally, we'll end the webinar with a recap of our discussion and personal observation. I am Yusuf, Head of Regulation. The Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub was launched in October 2018 with the objective of promoting Mauritius as a FinTech innovation hub for the African continent. Our purpose is to improve the quality of life in Africa by bringing together Mauritian, Pan-African, and global corporate startups, investors, academia, regulators, and all other stakeholders to collaborate in the FinTech space in a way that will empower African FinTech into the future. Our vision is to create this Pan-African FinTech ecosystem through open collaboration between all key stakeholders in order to build a successful FinTech hub, attracting and retaining talent, innovation, and investment into the African continent. We aim to achieve our purpose and vision through our 4 core pillars, which include innovation and incubation, skill and capacity building, which is involved into upskilling program, financial literacy, and our bespoke Future FinTech Champion program. We also have investment and deal flow, which aim at connecting startup and innovators. And lastly, regulatory and policy strategy. As head of regulations at MAFH, my role consists of advising our members and prospective members on regulations impacting the FinTech industry. And we have also been working towards regulatory reforms through collaboration with policymakers, regulators, and stakeholders. We seek to achieve those reforms through participation in working group sessions, submitting recommendations to policymakers, and organizing regulatory roundtables. Now, today's webinar aims to demystify the regulatory sandbox license framework as currently enforced in Mauritius. We will not be using any magic wands, but would be relying on slides and words. And we have today's expert on the subject, Mrs. Jaya Doomun-Dookun from the EDB. And this webinar has been organized following numerous requests that we have received from our members and the FinTech ecosystem on the topic of RSL. And we hope to clear misunderstandings that have been observed during our interaction. We hope that this webinar will clear any concerns you may have on the RSL framework, and feel free to drop any of your questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of Zoom's interface. So, as I mentioned, we have Mrs. Jaya Dookun, Manager of Financial Services at the EDB with us, who plans to provide a better understanding of the RSL framework and effectively demystify the topic. Before I hand over to Jaya, I would just like to remind you to keep your questions concise so that we can effectively address them. Thank you for bearing with me. I will now hand over to Jaya.
Thanks, Yusuf. I am part of the Financial Services Department at the EDB. So my role is to promote and attract investment in the financial services sector. I'm also part of the technical committee for the regulatory sandbox license, part of the secretariat as well for the National Regulatory Sandbox License Committee. So I'll just give you an overview of the EDB. We operate under the aegis of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. Our role is to promote and attract investment. We are responsible for country branding, for business facilitation, trade and investment promotion, as well as strategic economic planning.
Thank you, Jaya. Before we start with the Q&A and your presentation, I'd just like to mention a statistic that came across this morning. But surprisingly, there are 73, only 73 fintech sandboxes across the globe, and those feature among 57 countries. And almost half of those were set up in the first half of 2020. Would you mind telling us a bit, what is a regulatory sandbox license there?
So the regulatory sandbox license offers the possibility for an investor to conduct a business for which there is no regulatory framework. So I will give you an example. Back in 2016, we had a project. It was about a peer-to-peer lending platform, which offered the possibility for individuals and corporates to lend directly to small and medium enterprises. So at that time in 2016, we did not have a framework for such a project. It was an innovative project. It added value to the Mauritian jurisdiction, but unfortunately, there was no legal framework. So this is when the EDB took on board that project and gave the project the regulatory sandbox license, where the project was allowed to operate within a specific terms and condition. So this is where the sandbox was introduced in 2016. It was announced in the budget, and out of it, an amendment was done at the Investment Promotion Act to allow for the introduction of a regulatory sandbox license in Mauritius.
Thank you very much for this thorough explanation about what is a regulatory sandbox license. So the EDB issues RSL. Can you tell us a bit more about how the assessment of an application for an RSL is conducted at the EDB's end?
Yeah, so Yusuf, I have some few slides which I would like to share with you. Maybe it will be easier for the audience as well to understand in terms of the process that is involved for the regulatory sandbox license.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Jaya. And I would like to remind our attendees to feel free to drop any question in the Q&A panel at the bottom of Zoom's interface.
I'll try and just bear with me a little bit.
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
just open my slide. Yeah. So here we are. Maybe first of all, Yusuf, I'll just provide you an overview of the National Regulatory Sandbox License Committee. So this is a committee that was set up back in 2018. And this committee approves projects. It is it comprises of members from the Economic Development Board, the Financial Services Commission, the Bank of Mauritius, Financial Intelligence Unit, the ministries, the State Law Office. The objective of the NRSL committee is to assess FinTech project, to recommend a FinTech project to the EDB, and also to assign the monitoring phase of the project to either the FSC or the Bank of Mauritius. Now, what happened when we receive an application for the regulatory sandbox license? The application is sent to the EDB. When it is sent to the EDB, there is a verification process by the Secretariat. The Secretariat is managed jointly by the EDB and the Financial Services Commission. So the Secretariat will verify that we have the application form, we have all the requested information for the application. And then once we have a complete documentation, this project is referred to the technical committee. The technical committee comprises of the Financial Services Commission, the Bank of Mauritius, and the Economic Development Board. So the technical committee will request the investor to come and present the project. So once the investor presents the project, of course, there will be additional information that would be requested by the technical committee. Once we receive all the additional information and we see that the project is complete to be sent to the NRSL committee, so this is where the complete project is submitted to the main committee, which is the NRSL committee. And here I would like to add that the NRSL committee is chaired by Lord Anthony, who is based in the UK. So at the NRSL committee, what we do, we present the project. The members of the committee evaluate the project, assess the project, and then will recommend to the EDB whether to accept the project or to reject the project, or sometimes the project is also deferred for a later period. If it is accepted, of course, and a license is issued to the investor, and if it is rejected, a reason will be given as to why it has been rejected. The whole process from the time you submit to the EDB, the time the application goes to the NRSL committee and it's accepted, it would take, I would say, around 2 months. So this is the time frame for any investor. It will take around 2 months to get a license. Now I'll give you a brief in terms of how are we assessing an RSL project. So when an application form is given to us, of course, we'll see to it that we have all the documentation. Then we will look at the investor itself, the beneficial owners of the project. A due diligence would be done on the beneficial owners. Due diligence would be done on the proposed directors of the project. And the next phase, then once we are satisfied, we go and analyze the business plan. So when we are analyzing the business plan, apart from the various things that we will look at, specific attention would be paid on the value addition to the economy. How is the consumer protected? What is the risk to the jurisdiction? What is the risk to the consumer? And of course, in terms of the target market, are we targeting only Mauritius or are we targeting other countries as well? We will also look at whether the investor is taking into consideration the AML-CFT framework, whether the Data Protection Act is being taken into consideration, and whether the investor would be abiding to the FMLA law. So these are the things that we will look at when we are analyzing a particular project. And of course, there would be another thing, it would be the substance to the jurisdiction as well. What would be the employment? What would be the capital invested in Mauritius as well? This would be something important that we look at. So after the assessment is done, what we will do, we will, like I said in the process flow, we will send to the NRSL committee and a license will be given. Now, when the license is given, specific terms and condition is attached to each and every project, because each and every project is different in nature. In terms of the terms and condition that is attached to that project, so we first of all will have a standard condition and a specific condition to the project. When we're talking about a specific condition, it will be all about the capital requirement. It would be about maybe the target market. Sometimes we might restrict the target market, though a project has said that they want to look at various countries. So depending on the nature of the project and the risk to the jurisdiction, we might come about to tell you what we want you to have in the first phase of your project. So the target market would be specified in the terms and conditions. We'll specify to you as well in terms of the monitoring process. Either it will be the FSC or the Bank of Mauritius that would be monitoring your project. What would be the requirement? When you should be providing your report, your financial report every quarter, or when? What would be the time where we would require a demo from you as well? Because sometimes, you know, the project, when it is of FinTech nature, we find that there are some technologies that is being used, so we'll need a demo as well, if ever it's not yet developed, will allow you time to develop that technology and will request you for a demo for that technology. And of course, what we would provide as well would be like, what are the laws that you have to abide to? Like I said previously, the Data Protection Act, the AML-CFT framework, the FIAMLA law. And what I want to emphasize with regard to the license is that it would be issued for 1 year, but of course there is possibility for renewal as well. Now from 2018 until now, we have received around 25 projects which are of fintech nature. 25 projects whereby only 11 were successful and 11 were granted with a license. So these 11 projects which were granted a license, it's more peer-to-peer lending platform, cryptocurrency exchange, crowdfunding, and a number of projects that are dealing with e-wallet, digital wallet. I'm sure the audience would be thinking, 25 projects, only 11 given a license, what happened to the others? So the other 10 projects, what happened is that some of them were rejected because it was not innovative. Some of them did not require a license. They could have operated without a license. And there were some projects which did not go forward because, you know, there were like a regulatory framework which were about to come in 2 or 3 months. So then we did not assess the project. We preferred that the investor wait for the full-fledged license. So then it was not given an RSL. So this is a little bit brief overview of the RSL, its process, and what are the projects that have been given a license so far. So I'm sure, Yusuf, you have other questions for me as well.
Yeah, I do have a few questions, but I think we received a question from Ezekiel Rose, one of the attendees, and I think that has already been answered. And his question is, can you please elaborate on the factors taken into account prior to granting an RSL? Is there anything that you would add to what you mentioned during the what happened during the assessment of an application for RSL?
No, this is what like I told you, it will be with regard to the application form, it's with regard to the business plan, the fit and proper, if the investor, the due diligence with regard to the investor as well. So these would be the things that would be looked at when we are accepting an application for RSL.
Okay, thank you, Jaya. I have a question for you, more like speaking as a layman, it seems very complex. I mean, there's a lot of technical terms. For someone who is not familiar with what's a committee, what's a technical working group doing, is there anything that you would say to them to reassure them and to come forward and submit their RSL application to the EDB?
Yeah, actually, it might seem complex. In fact, even the term regulatory sandbox license, it's like a complex term. But actually, Yusuf, we have made it very easy to the investor. So like I would say that once an application is sent to the EDB, we are in constant communication with the investor. We tell them each and every process, what is happening, what is the status of their project. So don't forget, we are not only the regulator, we are also the promoter and we're also the advisor here. So we handhold those investors. And like I'm telling you, a status is given to the investor, what step their project is going through.
All right, thank you, Jaya. I can see we have a few more questions from members of the audience. We'll take those at the end of my Q&A with Jaya, but feel free to drop further questions that you feel need to be addressed by either one of us. So my next question is that you mentioned AML, CFT, data protection legislation, the FIAMLA legislation. Is there anything in particular but the applicant should be alerted when submitting the application?
Actually, sometimes when a project is given to us, of course, what we are saying, it's a project we are accepting it when there is no regulatory framework. But it does not mean that they should not abide to the other laws that is in place already in Mauritius. You see, so that's why we stress that whenever a project is coming to us, fintech nature, we have to be very cautious when it's dealing with consumers. What are the risks associated to the consumer? What are the risks associated to the jurisdiction as well? So this is why we emphasize that the other existing laws that is there in Mauritius they abide to those laws as well.
All right, thank you, Jaya. Now, it's a journey for the RSL applicant. So he's demonstrated that he met the criteria on the basis of his business plan, that he's a fit and proper person, and that he has a proper internal controls to comply with the existing legislation. And I think once he has met all those criteria, he would be issued with an RSL. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what happens once he's issued the RSL? Can he straight away start trading, or in case he has not got, I mean, you mentioned a demo, but is there anything else that he's subjected to after being issued the RSL?
Yeah, so maybe what I will emphasize, so sometimes we receive projects where they have not yet developed their technology. So it's on a case-to-case basis. Some projects which have already developed their technology, they are ready to operate on the market. We will give them, let's say, a period of 3 to 6 months to start their operation once they are given the regulatory sandbox license. There are other projects where the technology is not yet ready. So then the license is given for development of the technology, and then they will start the business. Then we will not emphasize the 3 to 6 months to start operating, because we are aware they have to develop the technology first, okay? Now, when we are giving a license as well, like I said previously, it is given for 1 year. When it is given for 1 year, within that 1 year, what we do, we work with the regulatory body so that we make sure that we come up with a relevant framework so that this project can transit to a full-fledged license. But there are times where it also takes time to develop a framework, okay? For example, I'll take the example of our first project, which was a peer-to-peer lending platform. In 2016, the project was given a license, but we renewed that project for another 3 years. It's because the jurisdiction was not ready to have the rules for the peer-to-peer lending platform. So it's only last year that we had the rule. This is when the project had a transition phase and then had to apply to the FSC for a full-fledged license. So each project will have a transition phase in the beginning when they are starting, and also when a framework is developed, where they will have the transition phase between the end of the RSL and the time that they have to go and apply to the relevant regulatory body for a full-fledged license.
All right. So there's a monitoring by the regulatory body, and then based on their findings, they deem it fit for the market and can issue a proper framework for that specific activity.
Yeah.
Is that correct from your perspective, Jaya?
Yeah.
Okay. Having another question. So we are talking about the ideal situation where the applicant is successful and everything is very rosy. He can start developing his platform or start trading. But what for the unfortunate ones that are not successful with the application?
Yeah, so there has been instances like that where like a project has been submitted, but unfortunately it has been rejected as well. But I've given you the why sometimes it has been rejected. So sometimes we feel that it's a risk to the jurisdiction, or sometimes we see that it's not adding value as such to the jurisdiction. Or sometimes there might be other reason which is given. So once we reject a project, of course, we will let the investor know why we have rejected that project. And it's up to the investor now to decide whether they want to alter their business plan so that they make it based on the reasons. If they alter their business plan, then they can resubmit that project and we can reconsider. You see? So it depends on the reason that has been given to them. So we are fine with an investor resubmitting a project based on the reason that we have provided. But in case if it's something that really we see that is not innovative enough, then of course we will reject that project. Then the investor will have no option but to consider something else.
All right. Thank you. So they have the option to cure any deficiencies or weaknesses that has been identified in the application. And then if those deficiencies have been cured, they are free to come forward and submit another application.
Resubmit the application. Yes.
All right. Okay. And I've seen that we have received some more questions from members of the audience. Before we start answering those questions, I would just like to remind members of the audience, but feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A panels and we'll start answering them shortly. So Jaya, we have a first question from Vishal Gobin asking, what financial vehicle is used for crowdfunding? Is it a fund or a trust or limited company or partnership?
Can you just repeat the first phrase, what financial?
Sorry, what financial vehicle is used for crowdfunding? Is it a fund or trust or a limited company or partnership?
Actually, I'll give you another example. Like when we are giving an RSL, okay, for any particular project. So it's up to the investor to decide what structure they would wish to use for the RSL. There has been instances where the activity has been approved and the investor decide to do a global business for a global business license, apply for a global business license for that particular activity. Given the fact that business is done outside of Mauritius and all the investors are outside of Mauritius, and of course, automatically it will classify for a global business license. Or when the project is a domestic project that is dealing with the Mauritian market, then it will have to be a domestic company.
Okay, well, thank you. And I think it's very much open to the investor to choose the appropriate, appropriate structure. And especially that you mentioned a global business license, it's also taking into account financial fiscal impact on the entity operations. Right. I'll just now move to the next question from Balram Singh Balgobin, asking, is there any cost associated with application of the regulatory sandbox license?
No, there is no cost associated to it to get the license. So the only cost you will bear, of course, would be with regard to the structure of your company. If it's a GBC, then it will be the costs that you will have to pay to the FSC. Or if it's a normal domestic company, it will be the cost you will have to pay to the registrar of companies. But with the EDB, there is no cost associated.
All right. So that's very much an incentive for innovative projects and innovators, investors to come forward and submit the application to the EDB. I think you're doing a great work as a promoter of the Mauritius jurisdiction in that perspective. I'd just like to remind our attendees, I know I've been pushing forward to keep sending your questions because that webinar has been made especially to address any concern, and we are trying hard to demystify any concerns you may have with regards to the RSL. So feel free to drop your question in the Q&A panel. And we now move to a question from Ranjit Babua, asking, there's no legal framework for regulation of cryptocurrency in Mauritius. How is the platform licensed, operating, and who's regulating?
Who is the last word you said, Yusuf?
Sorry. And I think what Ranjit is looking, it's firstly, it's how cryptocurrency platforms are licensed, given that there are no legal framework at the moment, firstly. And secondly, who's regulating that activity in Mauritius at the moment?
So that's right. There is no legal framework for cryptocurrency exchange platform. And this is where the RSL, the Regulatory Sandbox License, takes on board such kinds of project. And you would certainly see the government has announced that there will in future be a framework for the digital asset marketplace. So in future, the cryptocurrency exchange platform would, of course, have a regulatory framework. In the meantime, we are addressing that gap. But so far, we have licensed one cryptocurrency exchange platform. It's not yet in operational, maybe in future soon. So this is what we do. We are addressing it at the level of the regulatory sandbox framework.
All right, thank you. All right,
Yeah.
now we have a question from Vishal Gobin, having some concern about confidentiality. And his question is there any kind of non-disclosure agreement from ADB to keep the project secrecy?
Yes, of course, we have it.
All right, I think like
Vishal, because we are aware it's of fintech nature. There are so many things there, and fintech is moving so fast. We have such kind of arrangement as well. All
right, so I think that can reassure Vishal to go ahead and submit his application to you. Okay, so we have a question from Ezekiel Rose, asking, since we mentioned about terms and conditions that are attached to the RSL, he's seeking to find out if there are any specific licensing conditions which may be attached to an RSL. And if so, can you please provide examples? Is that something you can state to the audience, Jaya?
It would be a bit difficult for... I've given you a brief overview on what we include in the license. Like I said previously, the specific conditions, the cloud compliance part of it, the monitoring part of it. So this would be in broad what is included in the terms and conditions. So it would be a bit difficult for me to go in detail on each one of it. Each and every application has a different terms and conditions, because it depends on the business model.
All right, okay, thank you. We have a question from Smita Hari, and I think it's in relation to when at the beginning you mentioned that the ADB is an issuer of the RSL. So her question is, does the ADB also act as supervisory body for the licensees? If so, what type of supervision is undertaken?
No, actually, all the projects that we are referring to the National Regulatory Sandbox License Committee are of fintech nature. And the minute it is of fintech nature, it is assigned either to the Financial Services Commission for all non-banking side, non-banking activities, or to the Bank of Mauritius for banking activities. So the EDB is not monitoring any of the projects. Like I'm saying, it's assigned to the regulatory bodies.
All right, thank you, Jaya. And I think that goes along what you mentioned about that the technical working group consists of the two super regulators in Mauritius. So we have the Bank of Mauritius for the banking industry and the Financial Services Commission. For the non-banking industry. So whoever is more deemed and fit to supervise the activity would be assigned as a supervisory body. Is that correct?
And then it makes sense, Yusuf, because like I was telling you, ultimately we will have to come up with a framework, because that activity will not be able to stay in the RSL forever. It's just a transition until we get the proper framework. So that's why the regulatory body has to be on board to be aware what are the projects, what are the activities, how are they conducting those activities, so that the right framework is ultimately devised.
Sure. And okay, we are left with one question from Ezekiel Rose, and I'll invite members of the audience to send any more questions that they might have. But I would just like to chip in something. But when you mentioned that the RSL itself, flows from a budget recommendation and budgetary measures in 2016. And I think that was with the idea that Mauritius would eventually transform itself into a leading fintech hub, be it within Africa or globally. And now we have a question from Ezekiel Rose asking, what are the merits of granting a cryptocurrency related RSL in view of the current uncertainties surrounding Bitcoin, for instance?
Actually, we are aware of it, and we are also very cautious when we are giving an RSL license, especially for a crypto currency exchange platform. Our aim from the government side is to enlarge, to enhance the ecosystem for fintech. And you know, fintech is moving fast. If you do a benchmarking with various jurisdictions, you will see that one of the activities, of course, is the cryptocurrency exchange platform. This is where we are all moving towards fintech. So why not to consider it as well, where we see that it is going to enhance the fintech ecosystem of the country, but we are very cautious. And in granting such kind of license as well. We have received so many requests, but so far only one has been successful. And the FSC is also closely monitoring such kind of projects.
All right, and I think it goes in line with what you mentioned, that we need to ensure the soundness and reputation of the jurisdiction, and also safeguard consumers from any like scams that they might fall victim of. And I would say that in just add to what Ezekiel mentioned, and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Yes, Bitcoin is one form of cryptocurrency, but there are so many coming up on the market that we have to be very cautious as to which one is a genuine one, and it's subject to a lot of subject to volatility, and that's why I guess there's this enhanced scrutiny from the NRSL committee. To safeguard consumer principally, and then we need to ascertain whether it's fit for the market. Is that right, Jaya?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's from Ezekiel. And we now have a question from Chishta Ganu, who's asking, when talking about a need for Sandbox, what are the criteria taken into consideration to attest that a business has a genuine need for testing within the Sandbox framework?
Again, I will come back to my presentation where the Sandbox, the objective of the Sandbox is to grant a license where we see it's innovative for the jurisdiction. We see that it is encouraging startup, and we see that it is encouraging the transfer of technology and the transfer of skills. So this is where whenever we are assessing the project, we see to it that there are those elements with regard to whatever is being proposed in the business plan. Like I was saying as well, we want to enlarge the ecosystem for fintech. We want to have more innovative companies to be part of the Mauritian landscape. So innovation would be something that we would look at, transfer of technology, and also if it's a startup, we want to grow more startups.
All right, and I think that's something reassuring, however crazy the project might sound, as long as it's innovative. And it meets the criteria you mentioned during your presentation for the assessments that's carried out by the Regulatory Sandbox License Committee, they would be granted an RSL subject to certain terms and conditions and a monitoring that would be carried out by the supervisory body.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that we don't have any more questions. I think we've done a great, you have done a great job of demystifying the RSL framework. If members of the audience have any more questions, feel free to share them in the Q&A panel. So we don't seem to have any more questions coming in, Jaya, from what I can see here. Oh, we just have one from, okay. So we have one from an anonymous attendee. So yeah, we are trying to demystify, so let's take the anonymous one as well. The FSC and the Bank of Mauritius have a list of licensees on their website. Does the EDB have such a list?
For the Sandbox, we have included a list of RSL licenses on the website. We have included it. It's in the section for financial services, subsection FinTech.
All right, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that should be able to guide the person to find the right information that they are after. So since we don't have any more questions, I think we can proceed to the recap part of today's webinar. No further questions as far as I can see. So I'll just move on to the recap section. No question. So we've learned today from the webinar that the RSL framework was first announced in 2016 national budget, and that it has shown itself, the RSL framework, that it is welcoming to innovative FinTech projects, provided that they add substantial value to the jurisdiction and that they meet the appropriate criteria and are compliant with existing legislation. And we also had the pleasure to find out more about the inner workings of the National Regulatory Sandbox License Committee. It sounds very technical, and I think Jaya has been able to clarify what it entails about the technical working groups and the criteria that are considered and what are the factors that is taken into account and what the applicant should be focusing their attention onto. And also mentioning the key documents which the National Regulatory Sandbox License Committee relies upon, and what has been as an incentive that there are no fees attached to submitting an application for RSL. And we also found out what are the avenues available in case that the RSL application is not successful, but they are free to submit a fresh application, provided that they have cured any deficiencies or weaknesses that have been identified, as EDB with any rejection provides reasons why the application is rejected. So, and from my end, and my takeaway from today's webinar is that the RSL framework provides numerous advantages. I mean, that's my personal opinion for both. It provides numerous advantages for both the innovator and the regulators in Mauritius. I mean, from a FinTech entrepreneurs and investor perspective, I gather that even if there's no legal framework for their project at the moment, they are free to submit an RSL application. And once it's been approved, and they can start developing and launching an innovative project rather than waiting for a legal framework to be issued for that specific activity. And that also, I guess, provide them with an opportunity to test the market in Mauritius and see how the product itself is received by residents in Mauritius, and then seek to further expand. And hopefully once they've been subject to monitoring and met the concerns of the supervisory body, but there would be a regulatory framework that would be issued as a designated regulator. So that's my perspective from the entrepreneur and investors in innovative fintech projects. And I think that from the regulators' perspective, it also provides them an opportunity to test, to assess actually how innovative projects are being carried out in Mauritius within the Sandbox framework, to raise any concern they might have and deem it whether it's appropriate or not to issue regulatory framework. And since we are also moving and aiming to transform Mauritius into a leading fintech hub, I think that's important, but because we always mention that innovation comes before regulation. So we're always having to play catch up with the regulatory framework, but there's a halfway house where the RSL comes into play, and we can test it safely without any concern, risk to consumer, and also assess the maturity of the fintech activity before it is subject to a regulatory framework. And we have also observed that sometimes to reach the maturity, it takes up to 3 years, as you mentioned, for the peer-to-peer lending activity. And then we have the reassurance as well, but it is a project that is being subject to numerous and rigorous monitoring by the designated regulators. So I think in that case, that was a Financial Services Commission for the peer-to-peer lending activities. And they have last year issued the peer-to-peer lending rules. And that has opened the market for more actors to come and explore that market, leading to financial inclusion, providing innovative ways to secure capital for their project, which sometimes SMEs face difficulties. And we can see how that is contributing substantially to the Mauritius jurisdiction. And we have seen that the RSL framework promotes the government objectives of overall transforming Mauritius into a leading fintech hub, and it has effectively carried that so far successfully. Is that my takeaway and perception of what the RSL framework? Is it an accurate observation from your end, Jaya?
So one thing I would like to add, Yusuf, though the EDB is the regulator for the regulatory sandbox license, but we are also the promoter and the facilitator. So when a license is, an application is submitted to the EDB, we also advise the investor, we handhold the investor. And for us, a successful application would be an accomplished mission from our side. So the investor has to rest assured that we are going to advise them on the best way forward. We are actually hand-holding the investor.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jaya. And I think that should be reassuring to any potential RSL applicant that they are not left on their own in the wild, but the EDB is there to support them throughout the application process. And, I guess that they are like constant updates that are communicated to the applicant.
Yes, sure. Yeah.
And then they can take any appropriate actions to make sure that they meet the requirements. Is that correct from your?
Sorry, Yusuf?
No, I'm saying that there are constant communication between the EDB and the applicant, and that anything like request for information is a queue from the EDB, but there are additional information that need to be provided so that they can be successful. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I can't seem to find, okay, we don't have any more questions from members of the audience. And I think we have effectively demystified the regulatory sandbox license framework for members of the audience. without any use of magic wands or cape or any sort of device, magical device. So thank you very much, Jaya.
Thank you.
Oh. Oh, okay. It was just a thank you. I just saw like a notification. It's a thank you for the session from Ezekiel Rose. So thank you, Jaya, for your time and thorough explanation of the RSL framework. And I would like to thank members of the audience as well for their participation and for joining us and for their very interesting questions that they have provided us. And I hope that we done a good job. That you have done a good job, Jaya, and we look forward to welcoming you at our future events. And if you want to keep up to date with MAFH event, I would request that you please sign up for our newsletter which can be found on our website and to follow our social media accounts. So I don't have anything further to add to today's webinar other than to say that I look forward to welcoming you at our future event. Until then, stay safe, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anything you would add, Jaya, from EDB's side?
No, that's so. I look forward to receiving, now that the audience is aware about the regulatory sandbox license. So we look forward to receiving more projects to be assessed.
All right. Okay. Well, that's a lot of work coming your way, I guess. So,
but it would be something good for the jurisdiction. The more we have, the better is it for the jurisdiction.
Definitely. I agree with you on that. Okay. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And I will just end today's webinar. Until then, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.